When Shigeo was but a young child, he let his powers flow uncontrollably, and this led to an incident where he hurt everyone, particularly his younger brother. This is where the character of Shigeo ends and the character of Mob begins. Shigeo is an individual, fully realized person. Mob is a nickname. Mob literally means a disorganized group of people, but for Shigeo I think it takes on a slightly different meaning since he's of course only one person. In my view, Mob in the show means one person undistinguished from many. It's a fitting name as from here on, Mob is trying to fit in and mesh with everyone else. In other words, he's suppressing his individuality because he hates himself. Psychotherapist and philosopher Carl Jung describes the concept of the shadow. The shadow encompasses all repressed parts of the self. At birth, we are a whole, without any self-conscious or shame. Our interactions with others, first our caretakers, then our peers, chip away at that wholeness over time. Slowly, we learn to repress the parts of ourselves that discomfort others for the sake of acceptance and validation. When these traits are hidden early enough, and for a long enough period of time, these traits eventually disappear from our conscious awareness. However, in spite of being repressed, it still actually exists, just unable to be awakened consciously.
Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is. If an inferiority is conscious, one always has a chance to correct it. But if it is repressed and isolated from consciousness, it never gets corrected, and is liable to burst forth suddenly in a moment of unawareness. At all counts, it forms an unconscious snag, thwarting our most well-meant intentions.
This phenomenon can manifest in a very small number of people in the form of dissociative identity disorder or multiple personality disorder, or so is the theory. There's very much a live debate in the psychiatric field about whether this actually exists. I personally have my own doubts about whether the mind can truly compartmentalize itself into multiple distinct entities who are unaware of the other's existence. I just think it's such an extraordinary concept that requires extraordinary proof. Proof I have not been made privy to. My opinion is further substantiated by Alan Francis. Alan is someone who worked on the DSM-4 and said in his book, Saving Normal, that he feels as though multiple personality disorder is basically just a fad and a hoax. Anyways, that's beside the point. This is a cartoon. I bring this up because I believe this label is useful to help understand Mob. Multiple personality disorder is caused by childhood trauma. This makes it distinct from Jung's shadow. There needs to be a traumatic event that is tied to this condition. This is what Shigeo went through during his blood-soaked, unconscious childhood memory. With all this taken into account, I believe the symptoms of dissociative identity disorder are prominent enough within Mob to where you could accurately diagnose him with it. The first step in undoing this is meeting Reigen. Reigen assures Mob that just because he has psychic powers doesn't mean he's special. This stops Mob from hating himself as he now realizes that he wasn't born defective. So now he progresses from actively hating his powers to just avoiding them. This leads him to do some genuinely good things like going to the Body Improvement Club. The Body Improvement Club asserts to Mob that he can change, improve, and live a more capacious life. At the beginning of the series, we see that Mob is willing to use his powers for Reigen, but obstinately refuses to use it for anything else. Exceptions being when one of his emotions turns to 100%. The reason he's able to use his powers for Reigen's sake so freely is because Reigen is the one who made things better for him. Therefore, he believes that in order to keep everything good, he ought to do whatever he tells him to do. This makes it such that he has no opinions of his own. Moving on to Season 2, Mob gets a fake girlfriend named Emmy in the first episode. Despite it being fake, Mob sensed a level of sincerity in what she was saying. More sincerity than what he has been showing considering the fact that he lied about being a psychic. His experience made him privy to, as a third party, just how it is not being able to express who you are. Despite what she was saying to her friends, Mob sensed that she really did care about her journal. After her friends make fun of her and rip up her pages, Mob gets down on his hands and knees and picks up all of the bits one by one. However, in a gust of wind, all of those pieces fly away. Mob then uses his psychic powers, showing a part of who he really was in a moment of pure catharsis, to not only recollect the pieces but fully assemble them, pages and everything, in her journal. This was maybe the first time Mob was true to himself. And later on in that season, Mob starts to confront Reigen about what he truly wants. He talks about how he wants to be more active in school as opposed to working for Reigen all the time. Reigen in these scenes was refusing to accept himself as a con artist, which ended up causing conflict later on. Mob is only able to express his emotions all at once in an emotional burst. This is because he lacks all equilibrium. One side of the seesaw is tipped too far in one direction, metaphorically speaking, and so it is expressed in the most unhealthy way possible. This is displayed through the subconscious manifestation of all of Mob's numbers. This is why Mob shows no emotion. He suppresses all of them because he fears, he knows the full extent of his powers, and it's dangerous. While Mob's foreboding is reasonable, it is ultimately not good. Any part of ourselves which is locked away for long enough manages to leak in a number of unhealthy ways. When conflicting parts of yourself are ignored and never able to properly negotiate, the ultimate fight that they will eventually have only becomes delayed and magnified. This brings us to %% Mob. This is the Mob scene in Season 2, Episode 5 against Mogami and at the end of Season 3. I believe that this is when Mob is Shigeo Kageyama unhinged. It is the full extent of Mob's powers which can only be reined in once he learns to accept himself. In his encounter against Mogami, Mogami simulates an alternative life in which he lived without any of the friends he has now. Mob almost decides to rebel and destroy the world, but Dimple brings him back to his senses. He realizes that the interactions he has with people can have a positive or negative effect on them. He vows now to have a positive effect on everyone he meets. And if using your psychic powers is what it takes to do so, then so be it. He starts to realize that his power can be used not only to destroy but to also help others. And it's shown later in that season when he helps Serizawa. In the Season 3 finale, everyone tries to stop Mob to no success. It's only once Reigen catches up to Mob and admits that everything he did was fake to where Mob is able to calm down. This is because Reigen revealed, with his own mouth, that he himself, the man Mob looked up to, was also hiding something. Something similar happened in Season 2, but Reigen never audibly said it. This implies that even if he knows that Mob knows that this is kind of fake, he was still ultimately hiding it, not being fully, authentically true to himself out of fear. It was at this moment where Reigen fully accepted himself. And once this happens, Mob and Shigeo coalesce and Mob/Shigeo finally learn to accept themselves. After all of this, Shigeo and Ritsu see a cat and wish to save it. Shigeo puts his hand on a pole where the cat was standing and we're left to wonder if Shigeo will use his psychic powers. In a shocking turn of events, he chooses not to. Now this is very odd. Did he not just learn to accept himself? Why is he not using his psychic powers? Well, I believe that the point of this scene was to show that Mob had choices. Mob didn't use his psychic abilities because his physical strength would suffice, and that is what he chose to use. He now has a choice instead of the only option being to use his powers. He's gained muscles after being in the Body Improvement Club after all. I actually really like this scene because if he were to just use his psychic powers, he would basically just revert back to when he was a child where he used his psychic powers for everything. The next scene shows how Shigeo is absolutely willing to use his abilities. Shigeo caught the cake during Reigen's birthday and intentionally had it hit Reigen's face. This shows us that Shigeo is willing to use his power for jokes, pranks, and even non-serious matters, which is a pretty big deal for him. These scenes coupled together show how he's accepted his powers while also not wanting to always rely on them. His power is just one part of himself and he can pick and choose when he wants to use it. He can enjoy using his powers like he used to and is able to express things like genuine laughter while doing so. His emotions are balanced and able to not tip over in emotional outbursts. He doesn't use his powers to show off anymore like he did as a child. He's not defined by them anymore because of the leaps he's made in physical and social development over the years. Accepting yourself in Mob Psycho isn't merely about being able to visually express all that who you are. That would feel kind of shallow, stereotypical, and kind of boring. That would also reduce Mob to using his powers the same way that villains use them. I believe that Mob Psycho's ultimate message is the freedom to express all that you feel is appropriate to express, and the freedom to be able to express all of which you are capable of. So work on yourself and become more capable. That way you are able to express more of what you are. And it's only once you have fully reached your potential to where you truly have freedom. I consider Mob Psycho a modern classic and a masterpiece. I hope this video was able to show off at least a little bit of that. My only complaint about the show was that I kinda wish Dimple actually died, and those alien episodes I was pretty confused about, so if you understand those and can give me more insight into that, I'd appreciate it. All in all, thank you for watching. Peace.